Hey, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of UCB on Mission. I just made it sound like a game show. It's not. If you are a follower of Jesus, then you are on his mission. You're following him on his mission to love God and love neighbor. Now, my part of that mission looks different than your part of that mission. So, what is UCB on Mission? It's a space where we can learn together about our mission together as a family of God on the mission of God. As the Apostle Paul says, so whether you eat or drink or whatever you do, do it all for the glory of God. Now, since I'm going to mention eating and drinking, I don't want to leave out our good friends and sponsors over here at Sola. Sola has got the best New Orleans food in Bogota. I need to get you an updated menu on here because they've added a number of things. They've got like the spare rib po' boy now, and this spicy Narland sausage shrimp poutine thing. It's delicious. And if you haven't had it yet, you need to check it out. All right, let's get back to our program. And it's my pleasure to introduce to you our very special guest, the Reverend Andrew Baxley, who serves here at UCB as the pastor of youth and families. Hey, Baxley, what's up?
Hey, how's it going?
You
So
know,
you're saying this is not a game show.
this is not a game show, though. If you
There's nothing I can win by doing this.
you can win the approval of our church, maybe some prayers. I
Okay, so
mean,
what you're saying is I don't have the approval of our church now, and I need to gain it to this interview. Got it. Okay, I'm ready to go.
all right, that's all the time we have today on UCB on Mission. I'll.
All
uh,
right.
so Baxley, we're
I'm happy to be here. I'm excited to talk.
you're in South Carolina, which means you're missing out on this kind of cold, sort of like Jovisnando, Bogota, August day here, or is it? It's August, yeah. So you're in South Carolina, sunny South Carolina, right?
You don't know how much I missed that. Actually, I think I forgot what hot weather was like living in Bogota for the last 3 years.
Oof.
Uh, and this is my third shirt today.
Your third shirt today. That's amazing. Yeah, this is like my third shirt this week. So, uh, no, I'm just kidding. Just kidding. We are washing our sweatpants here at the Lupton household. We've got Laura and Moises on here. Hey guys, how are you doing? Maria Angeles is on here. She says hello. Victoria says hello. Juliana says hello. Hey guys, how's everybody doing? Yeah. So here we are. Let's talk about ministry to the next generation. So, Maxley, I don't know, maybe you just always knew that you were going to be a pastor of youth and families serving in Bogota, Colombia. But if that's not the case, tell us, how did you sense the call to ministry and how did you end up down here in Bogota?
All right. So, call to youth ministry in general actually came while working with you. Funny enough. So I grew up in a ministry household. My dad's a pastor. I was around ministry a lot. I kind of saw the both sides of it, the joys, but also the trials. I knew that I never wanted to be a senior pastor. That was just like something I never wanted to do. But I had throughout my childhood, there was times when I thought about doing ministry of some sort. But my call to ministry came the summer after my sophomore year of college. I was working at a camp with the Reverend Andrew Lupton, who was not a reverend at the time. And I just remember working with these students and really enjoying that. But that wasn't the main thing that made me want to do student ministry. The main thing was the group of counselors we had that summer was a group of guys who, for the most part, were committed to Jesus. And Andrew, who was our counselor leader of sorts. And I remember coming together with these guys in Andrew Lupton's apartment as a young college student and being encouraged in this group to be incredibly vulnerable with my own brokenness and my own sin and the ways that I was really twisted. Things that I had spent a lot of my life trying to hide, or things that I had tried to cover over with, I don't know, a good outward appearance, but I knew deep down there were hidden sins in my heart that I'd never really told anyone about. And the ability to be able to share those openly in this community of other guys in the context of not just saying them so we can get them off our chest, but recognizing that each of these other guys are going to say, hey, Jesus loves you and Jesus has paid for those sins and you now are righteous in the sight of God. Just having that community around me to be able to tell me that, freed me to be open about my sin, and allowed me to experience God's grace in a whole new way. I knew of God's grace, but I experienced it that summer. And while working with students, I thought, you know what? I want students to experience that same thing. I want young people growing up to not have to wait till their sophomore year of college to experience that kind of thing. I want them from the day they're born to be surrounded by that in their church. I want them to experience youth ministries that reflect that idea, to be in small groups with their peers so they can be pushed to believe the gospel, not just for themselves, but for each other. So that's what I did after college. I served as a youth minister, a middle school youth director at a church for a few years, went to seminary. And then the whole Bogota story is a whole different story. But I knew Andrew from back in the day. We had kept up over the years. And long story short, he and his boss had been kind of, throwing bait out there, trying to like reel me in a little bit for different projects they were doing, different internships. And I participated in some of those. And, Andrew, all of a sudden in 2014 was the new senior pastor of UCB, and the church is experiencing a lot of growth. And at that point in my life, I was had just gotten engaged to the woman who is now my wife, Kelly Baxley. And she, being a professional counselor, made her and I a power couple of sorts, I guess. I don't know. But Andrew was like, hey, he called us and was like, hey guys, I need someone who could do youth ministry for me since I can't handle that with all my other responsibilities now. And this church needs someone who can help us navigate the way forward and some of the counseling needs of our church. And I wasn't really always called to missions or to international service, but the Lord had been already working on my heart. And meanwhile, Kelly had been a missionary for 3 years prior to seminary in China. And we both looked at each other and said, maybe this is the calling for us. So not many of you, some of you are still here from our vision trip in 2015. We came down for a summer right after we got married, got to know some of you, a lot of people at UCB at the time, and it was just clear that the Lord was calling us here. And 2 years later, we showed up and haven't left except for the last few months. Understandably so. But that's the short story of my entire life.
That's great. All right, Baxley, I've got a little boy in the room here with me right now who wants to see the end of the Cardinals game. So we're going to go ahead and jump to questions from a kid.
It's time for questions from a kid.
All right, we've got Fox here, 8-year-old Fox. How you doing, man?
Doing okay.
Doing okay. Your face is a little red. You go outside and ride your bike a little bit?
Thank goodness we can go outside and at least do a few things now.
For real. Thank goodness.
Instead
All right.
of like strict quarantine, not very strict quarantine, not very strict quarantine, and it's probably going to repeat over and over and over again.
Yeah, it's weird, right?
Sure.
But hey, we'll take advantage of it as we get it, right?
Yeah.
All right, so Fox, you know this guy? Yeah, okay.
He's been basically all my life friend.
He's been all your life friend, yeah. You've known him for a lot of your life, I'd say. I've known him for longer than I've known you.
What? It's true.
Amazing. Almost as long as I've known Mommy. All right, so Fox, Baxley is a youth pastor, or we'll call him the pastor of youth and families. So what do you have in terms of questions for Baxley, the youth pastor?
Okay. So what is your favorite boss? Who's your favorite?
My favorite boss. Well, I think fighting Bowser in the Mario video games was my favorite boss to fight. Oh, wait, you're not talking about video games. My favorite boss, like the boss I've ever had. Well, I mean, obviously, your dad.
I thought he was going to say mommy.
Yeah.
Yeah, you thought that was funny, right?
Yeah, I knew he would say you.
Yeah, did you? Good. Well, we'd have to end the show if he didn't.
Yeah, I didn't really have a choice there. This feels like a trap now.
Yep. So, do you want to ask him about his year-end review? No, I'm just kidding.
That was like my very last question, and since I knew it would be kind of a funny question, I put it all the way to first.
Okay, thank you for that. Thank you for breaking the ice here, calming my nerves before we jump into the real investigative questions.
I see what you did there, Fox. And actually, that was very youth ministry-like. You start out with an icebreaker to make Baxley comfortable, and now you hit him with the hard-hitting questions. So what's your second question?
Okay. What is it like to be a youth pastor?
Wow. Well, being a youth pastor is riding your bicycle on a very, very thin sidewalk. Okay? On the left, you've got like, I don't know, some chasm you could fall into, and on the right, you've got like, I don't know, an entire yard full of things you don't want to fall into, right? And you're on this thin sidewalk. You're going down it, and the sidewalk represents trying to navigate this line between relating to young people in a way where they feel comfortable with you, but yet still be an authority figure there. So I feel like a lot of times at youth group, I'm riding this line where I want to relate to young people like I'm their friend, but also at the same time, I want to be someone they look to teach them about the Bible, or to who has maybe been where they are, but can be a few steps ahead to kind of help them navigate their life, to shepherd them through the joys and the hardship of life as I've lived it before them. But yeah, I don't want to lose that level of like relationship where I'm in it with them. I don't want to be like just the guy who's just some old guy who they don't have a real relationship with. I want to have a real relationship on their terms.
Cool.
That's one of the ways I think of youth ministry.
So it's like either veering off into the traffic and having the Transmilenio bus clip you, or veering off onto the other side of the road, which has what?
Cactuses.
Lots of
cacti.
Cacti. Yep.
Exactly.
All right.
So yeah, you don't want to veer onto either edge, because you either lose your voice to speak because you're just another friend, or you lose your ability to speak into their life because you don't actually have a real relationship.
Yep.
That someone who understands them. That's one of the ways that there's a lot of other things that it feels like to be a youth pastor. Sometimes it feels like super fun, and some days it feels super hard.
All right, what's your last question?
Like with sometimes school is really fun, and sometimes it's like impossible, like really, really hard.
Mm-hmm.
The hard
kind of like that.
The hard that you don't want to do it.
Yeah, you know those days when you go to school and then you come home crying? Some days it's like that.
Yeah.
Except you go to school at home, and so you just cry.
You don't have to come home. You just get to cry at home.
All right. What's your last question, Fox?
What's your favorite part about being a pastor?
Ooh, man, I don't know. I've got a lot of favorite parts of being a pastor. I really like being a part of the church. I really love the church, not the building, but I love being a part of God's people. And that is just something that as a Christian, I think for anyone, it brings a lot of joy to be a part of that community, and to watch the ways that just the way the church works can help serve different needs of the body, can help people encounter Jesus. I love that I have the privilege of being a part of that work, be a part of the team that's planning it. Not that I'm what worship is about. I don't want to be that, but I get to be a part of helping people meet Jesus. So I'd say as a pastor, that's one of my favorite parts. And I just am thankful to be a part of United Church, where I'm just proud I'm just proud of the work that our local body is doing. And I'm excited to be a part of that.
Yeah, so am I.
Good.
Yeah, man.
Me too.
Are you?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
And mommy's probably too.
Yeah, it's a lot of work sometimes, but hey, it's fun. Hey, I'm going to give you this. You know what to do with it.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Fox. You're the man. All right, Baxley. I'm going to show you a really cool part about being a father of older children in a second. So I want to talk more about the ethos that you described. We could approach it as this grace-based ethos that you have, where students and even members of your team, whether they're staff or volunteers, feel comfortable to be vulnerable and to be growing as they help people grow. Or we can talk about what the ethos as a pastor friend, right? As somebody who has a relationship with your students, but is also still a pastoral voice. I'd love to just hear you talk more about that and what that looks like in our youth group, and how you're creating that sort of ethos.
Right. So one thing when I'm talking about like philosophy of ministry, for instance, there's the ideals and there's the reality, right? So I sometimes going to blend, as I'm sure as I'm talking, with the ideals with the reality, and some of this is the way I want our youth group to be, and it isn't there yet, and some of it is the ways that it is already, and I'm thankful for. Oh wow, Silas, where's mine?
Yeah.
Thank you, Silas. Oh look, he gave it to me.
He's joking.
In my family, for some reason, my parents' house, all of their mugs are Christmas mugs.
That's great. That's fantastic. All right, get out of here, dude. That's weird because all of ours are Easter mugs, so
So let me talk about what I desire for our youth ministry, and I think our ministry itself reflects some of this, and maybe in some ways we can improve. So I think what I want from our ministry, for when a student walks into one of our programs, for instance, our youth group we have Friday night youth groups for high school and Sunday afternoon youth groups for middle school right now. That's where our two main events. And to those events, we regularly will have visiting students come in. These students are coming from different backgrounds, and so I can't be like, okay, they're all going to be like this. Sure, we have some that are church kids, some kids from our church who come to our youth ministry. You have some kids who are friends of those kids who maybe are coming from unchurched families in their schools. They're not kids who have grown up in a Christian family. Their biblical knowledge or relationship with Jesus is zero or low. You have other kids who are coming from other churches, potentially who don't have a youth group, but whose experience of Jesus may or may not be accurate, for lack of a better way to say it. And sometimes it's really great, and sometimes, I don't know if the Jesus is the Jesus I know. When those kids walk into our ministry, we want their interaction, particularly with our leaders, so with me and Savannah and our other volunteers, to be kind of like the relationships I described, where they will come in and these leaders will engage and love on these students, interact with them, delight in the things that these kids are delighting in, not expecting to delight in something else, but actually delight in what they delight in, and to build those relationships interpersonally between our leaders and these students. As we're building those relationships, what we're going to be doing, though, is we're going to be teaching hard things. We're going to be, or not necessarily hard things, we're going to be teaching the gospel of Jesus Christ, right? We're going to be teaching that our kids, whether they come in knowing Jesus or not, are sinners, that they're desperately in need of God's grace, but that God has sent his son in order to pay the penalty for those sins. As we get to build the relationships with our students, we want them to not only hear this reality of the gospel, we also want them to experience it. So, for instance, if a student comes in and as we built this relationship, they are deeply struggling with, or they're struggling with a sin, or they have gotten into trouble, for instance, or they are involved with something that is harmful to them, and something that we would call sin. The relationship gives us the ability to challenge that, to actually call them out for that sin. And this is why this is really effective, because we have a relationship with them and we're able to call them out of the sin, to challenge their heart, longing for something that is not good for them. We're able to do that while still in relationship with this student. We're not saying, oh, you have sinned and you have failed, therefore you must get out. It's a, hey, you have sinned. Let's talk about it. And let's talk about how the grace of God covers over that. And it actually drives you towards a new longing, a longing for something that is good and that God has designed for you. And the relational element of that allows us to not veer on either side of a different kind of pendulum. We're not shaming them and saying, hey, your sins are too big for us. But we're also not saying your sin is okay, you can do whatever you want. It's the challenge of the gospel. And I don't know, I'm kind of just spitballing here, but that's kind of like the idea behind our ministry. We want to have those relationships so that we can have those hard conversations. It's not always about sin. It might just be about we want our students to be able to get to a place where they can be genuinely open with themselves, and so that they can be known. And in a way, that would be experiencing the gospel as well, because one of the truths of the gospel that we find to be very important is that God looks at his people and he knows them, and he chooses to enter in with them incarnationally in the form of Jesus, so that he might know his people more deeply, and because he loves them. There's a deep empathy that God has for us, and we want that to be experienced by our students. And one of the things we find is that students, no matter what background they come from, whether they're the church or the unchurched, or they're something in between, we find that there's something captivating about that approach to all of those students. Because I really think in our hearts, we are longing to be treated like that. We are longing to be able to be in a place where we can be fully known and fully loved, right? There's like the bad news, which is you could be not known and loved, which is fake. You could be not known and not loved, which is like abandonment. Or you can be the worst one. You can be known and not loved, which is rejection and super painful, which unfortunately a lot of these kids have, a lot of youth, I would say, in general in the world have experienced. Or our youth group wants to do what Jesus does, where he knows us and he loves us anyway, and he loves us into relationship. And so that's kind of the approach we take with our students. And because it kind of like, when students experience this, I'm not saying every student, every time, but often when students experience this dynamic where they're loved and known, it draws them in and they want to know more. And the only thing we can do is not point to ourselves, because deep down we don't love our students perfectly, but we can point to Jesus, who has loved us, loved our leaders in that way. that's kind of the ethos we're trying to create as we do student ministry.
And do you find that both types of students are looking for that same thing? So when I was doing your job, we would have very, very churched students, and then we would have students that have never darkened the door of a church. This is their first time in the church, and they just came because we've got pizza, or because they're going out with their friend after youth group, and they were like, yeah, sure, we'll stop off here first, right? So highly religious students, highly non-religious students, are they both longing for the same thing?
Absolutely. I think okay, there are some students who come in and maybe because of the church they had come from or their family life, they get the gospel. They have experienced the ethos I am describing in their families. And so they're actually in a really good place. And our ministry just seeks to help continue that for those families who are doing that.
Yeah.
But we also have students who come in with two kind of false understandings of the church. So you have the super churched student who's coming in, but has never really experienced the gospel. But they have kind of thought that Christianity was all about following the rules. Maybe they thought it was about doing these spiritual things. Maybe it was about talking spiritually or praying in a way that sounds spiritual. But it still felt like it was pretty much them focused and their ability to do certain things right. And the other end of it would be the unchurched, who maybe had a perspective that also was what church was about, and that church was all about doing the right things, following the arbitrary rules that I don't know, that God had set up for them, and desired to take away any fun or freedom that they have. Mm-hmm. So maybe those are two really stereotyped positions that describe kind of like the different sides of the spectrum, right? But the gospel answers both of those, and it flips them on their head, right? To the one who thought they were a good Christian by just doing good things all the time, they're encountered with like, oh wait, our youth pastors don't treat us like we are naturally good. They don't talk about us being naturally good. They talk about us being sinners. They talk some of the highest values that we emphasize in our ministry are neediness and dependence. That we are not people who do things right. We are people who are needy of Christ's righteousness and are dependent on Him for any further righteousness that we do down the line. We get none of the glory for it. And the good thing about that is it kind of breaks down their idea of what Christianity was, but it allows them to be fully known. Because really, the kid who thinks they're doing everything right has so much deeper sin than they realize in their heart. I mean, that was me growing up in the church. The kid who's unchurched, they think that it's just about these rules. And then as we talk, as we build this relationship, they realize that maybe their heart's actually longing for this anyway. Maybe they actually, what they think is going to bring them happiness or joy, this freedom, isn't really freedom at all. They start to realize that maybe they're enslaved to their own shame. They're enslaved to their own guilt. And I have people here, older people in my life, who really love me no matter what I do, and who point me to Jesus. And the laws that they're pointing me to are actually things that are going to bring me true joy and true freedom. The following Jesus, the discipleship that we're calling them to, actually calls them to real life rather than to death. I don't know if I'm describing that well, but for sure, both sides are longing for the same thing. All of us are longing for that. And sadly, I think being fully known and fully loved is not something humans are very good at.
Right.
And Jesus really is, and he's done that for us.
Yeah. So one of the things I like about our church in general, but our youth ministry in particular, is that it is gospel centric. So you come from this background, you come from that background, you're going to hear the gospel, you're going to hear about Jesus and his work and his free love and grace. But I mean, I've been to youth group and I've taught youth group at our church plenty of times, and in there, it's not just all right, everybody, have a seat. We're going to talk about the gospel today, and that's our lesson. You're actually taking on some of the biggest questions that the next generation is asking. I wonder if you could help our audience understand what some of these big questions our students are asking, because we can talk later maybe about the gap between generations, but they just may not be aware of the heart questions of students.
Yeah. One thing we do this year's going to look a little bit different. So we're actually doing things a little bit different this year. But the first few years I've been here, every spring, so starting in January, our whole semester would be hard questions. So basically our students can turn in any questions they have, anonymously or with their names on it. Any questions they have about the Bible, about life, about God, about the Old Testament, about the New Testament, whatever it is. And our goal would be each week of youth group to look at one of those questions and to talk about what does the Bible have to say about that. Or
students, right?
Yes, this is for high school students, absolutely. Those questions really have a wide range of kind of the things that kids are answering. One thing that is pretty common, though, unfortunately, is that it feels like a lot of our kids are not used to having people in the church take their questions seriously.
Right.
Maybe their church would tell them, you just need to have faith, or you just need to trust God, which obviously we need to have faith and trust God. But I think that often, because we have faith and because we trust God, we can enter into hard questions, right, and look at them from a biblical perspective. Questions that we've dealt with in the past, we have some things such as, why does the Old Testament seem to condone slavery? Or why does the Bible seem to condone slavery? What does the Bible really say about homosexuality? Those are more like biblical, like maybe they've heard it, maybe they have their own personal attacks on Christianity because they're not Christians, or maybe our students have heard from their classmates or from social media, people saying, the Bible, God's all for slavery in the Bible, or God says this or that. And so we'd like to look at those things and what does God actually say about those things, and not only what is the answer, but why might the way we think about this question reframe our understanding of God. Mm-hmm. And so the whole goal is really often to just bring us back to Jesus, and let's look at how Jesus reframes our view of how we see all of these things. And I'm not going to seek to answer those questions right now, but if you want to talk about those kinds of questions, I'd love to. But other questions that aren't as much about like atheist attacks on the Bible, but are just life questions, are like, what does God have to say about anxiety or suicide? What does God have to say about relationships, relationships with friends, toxic relationships? That's a common catchphrase you'll hear among young people. What are toxic relationships, and how do you deal with those? How do you navigate relationships with your family? Or even I try not to take a very hard stance on some things. I like to leave certain things to family discretion, but like even questions such as dating, or what is the purpose of marriage? How do I deal? Another one that always comes up: how do I deal with habitual sin? How what does the Bible have to say about a sin that I keep doing over and over again and can't seem to stop? That's a common one we talk about. So yeah, that's one of the things we found to be really important. This generation is just very open to ideas, which is good and bad. Like, it's bad because I know that older generations have trouble because it's like, is there any grounding to what they actually believe? Or are they just swayed by the culture or whatever all the time?
Right.
But on the other sense, it gives you an opportunity to speak even into the lives of kids who might be atheists or agnostics, or their families might be atheists or agnostic, because they're actually willing to listen to you and engage with you on some really difficult topics. So I don't know. I think sometimes dealing with the hardest topics doesn't push people away from Christianity, but actually draws them closer, because they're like, oh, I just assumed that Christians had no answer for that. Or I just thought about this question in this one way, but I never really understood a more biblical perspective on that.
What I find interesting in what you're saying is some of the adults, quote unquote, who are watching this are thinking, I have that same question. I'm also wondering that. What does God think about social injustice? What does God think about toxic relationships or sexuality or besetting sins? Like, I also have that question, and I know what your answer to this is, but should we just leave the church and church workers like you and your team to answer those questions, or are we, like caring adults, supposed to be in the lives?
Yeah, I think I mean, obviously the answer to your question is that I should not be the only one answering these questions. I admit that I do have more training in these matters than the average parent, for instance, or the average adult in the church. But I think the calling of the church to reach the next generation is a calling on the entire church. It's not a calling on one youth pastor. And I do believe that reaching the next generation is a cross-cultural work. So we talk about this more, I think, in the modern day church with missions, right? We're going across the sea to minister to a people group who do not know the gospel, or to assist the local church in reaching a group not familiar to our culture. And when you go to another culture, for instance, when I came to Colombia, I learned the language. Still learning the language. I had to learn the cultural understanding of things. I had to understand how Colombians think. I had to understand, and I'm still learning all these things. I don't feel like I've got like the corner on the market on all these things. I had to learn what was normal ways to act in a given culture. And I'm kind of tangenting from your question, but I think that we need to approach the next generation in the same way. And not just me, but the entire church needs to have an eye for the next generation and needs to be choosing to enter in to that generation and to learn about their culture. Because believe it or not, the kids growing up in your households or in your streets are a part of a different subculture than you are. We've talked about this in our parenting class, but they are growing up in a very different world than you grew up in. And the technology, the globalization of the world has made the world so much smaller that they are able to develop a growing youth culture that is different than your culture, which means that they have different values, they have different perspectives, they're asking different questions about the world. And all that back to your original question, that means as the church, we need to be willing to listen to the next generation enough to know what their questions actually are and then do the hard cultural work, the language learning, the culture learning that's required in order to speak into those questions, and to answer them as best we can. And that is on my heart, to answer those questions, but also to be a resource to adults as you engage with your neighbors or engage with your children. In your neighborhoods. And so if you're watching this and you have had some of these questions and you want help answering these questions for yourself, I would love to be that resource for you, or one of those resources for you, or to point you to some great books that have helped me, or articles, etc. That's a passion of mine, and it's also helped us do our mission.
So what I hear you saying is, traditionally we've thought about reaching an unreached people group we go and I picture Joel Stolte, right? Our legendary missionary and long-term member. And I picture him landing in his little prop plane there in the Llanos and kind of walking into the jungle or the community and just sitting there and watching and listening and writing down things and asking a helper, a language helper, or, a translator, a cultural translator even, what this means. And he has to construct a whole language for this people group that's unreached, and tell stories in a way that they understand it, like stories that are framed in their worldview, so that they will understand who Jesus is. And then eventually he's going to write the scriptures in a way that they understand it, using imagery that's faithful to the text, but actually reaches into their world and connects to their heart. And what you're saying is that the next generation is an unreached people group, it is the largest unreached people group, and it will perpetually be so, right? Because there's always a next generation. And that the church needs to attack this in the same way we would attack reaching an unreached people group in the Llanos. We go in, we do our ethnographic studies, we bring in experts, we talk, we share ideas, we relate, and we bridge to Jesus.
Yeah, and to be honest, I don't want to create. I think that is what it requires. I do think, though, that that's not just something you do and then you're done. It's kind of like a lifelong process in it. And I don't think I want to. I'm scared to talk about it that way and to scare people away from just building relationships with young people.
Yeah.
Because let's be honest, most of my ethnographic work in Colombia has not been in books. It hasn't even been in class, for language class. It's just been building relationships with people.
Yeah.
And knowing them and listening to what they have to say, and asking good questions and reflecting on those things. And it's just normal relationship building. We do it all the time. And it just takes a few extra steps when people are of a different culture, think differently than you do. But it's worth it. And it's really rewarding. And so I just think that with the next generation, I think back on my growing up years. I didn't have a youth pastor. Our church didn't have a youth pastor growing up. It was run by parents. But it was the people I remember growing up were just the random church members who would come up to me and have a real conversation with me. Like, ask me how I'm doing. Ask me about whatever, whatever it was I was interested in at the time, delight in me. And I to this day, I can remember faces of people who probably didn't even know that they had an impact, whose relationships with me made the church feel like a warm, welcoming place that I wanted to be. A place where I could be known and loved. So, although it's imperfect, right? It took a long time for me to fully get it. But that's really important. And I just think that our church has an opportunity. But it's scary sometimes because we feel like we don't know how to talk to the next generation.
Yeah.
And it's hard to write that line. It's hard to, especially when you're a parent. I get it. It's hard. You have to be an authority, and you also want to have good relationships with your kids. And it's difficult to ride that line. And that's why one of the reasons that we have a youth ministry at our church is so that I can be a support to you so that I can come alongside you and help you love on your children.
Mm-hmm.
So I can help this church love on the next generation. And I don't know, you make mistakes, I make mistakes. Our hope is that through our mistakes, though, we get to point people to Jesus who didn't make mistakes. Who did things perfect.
Yeah, you and I like to talk, and the people who trained us, about the need for youth ministry, and really it's the need for Christ's church. So we don't need to pigeonhole it into youth ministry or some culture's particular version of youth ministry, right? But ever since Genesis chapter 3, the family system is pulled apart, and raising the next generation is difficult, because the family system is pulled apart, because of the fall, because every little human being is trying to piece together answers to the question, who am I? Where do I belong? Does my life matter? So identity, belonging, purpose. And our world is very pleased to answer those questions in ways that are maybe destructive to one's personhood. The role of the church and parents is to tag team in a loving relational way those questions, and to point the people asking those questions to Jesus, who at the end of the day tells us about identity and belonging and purpose. That's all rooted, tied up in who He is. And I'm interested, so I'm leading into a question here. There are lots of different ways to do youth ministry. You just named one of them, which is to have like a parent team doing youth ministry. Cool, great. I did some sort of combination of that when I was a little kid, and when I became a Christian at 16, I was just eager to any Christian, whomever, wherever, didn't matter. That's where I wanted to be and learn and belong. There's the model that we are doing. There are other models. You see this a lot in our city, where you actually have a youth church, right? Like you have just a, hey everybody, welcome to church. If you're under the age of, let's say, 24, because youth ministry kind of reaches up to 24-ish, 25-ish here, your church is over in that building, and you're going to get your sermon and your music and everybody. And trust me, there are no gray hairs in the building. Go over there and do that. And so you have almost a constructing a separate church. And so I'd love to hear you talk about this idea of, is reaching the next generation building a separate church for them, or is it more integrated, something else?
Yeah, this is one of those things where you have the ideal and the reality, right? It's kind of like I don't know, I'm trying to think of a good example, but well, I'll just tell about what we have. You have this youth culture. You have youth and who naturally relate to other youth, within their culture, and then you have the greater church, which includes all generations. But you have trouble helping older generations relate to younger, and younger relate to older, right? It's a difficult thing.
Right.
But that is our absolute goal, is that our ministry that meets on Friday nights and Sunday afternoons is not the church.
Right.
We don't want it to be the church. We want it to be a gateway. We want it to be a doorway into the church. But we don't want it to be the church. And what I mean by that, I think, is that you've talked about this before, but you don't want to be, what we believe is that the church is multi-generational. Mm-hmm. We believe that it is different generations all together. God's view has always been generational from the very beginning. And so we believe that the church is a single unit. We don't believe we believe separating them serves to damage the church, because it actually creates I think for a couple of reasons. One, it hurts the older generations who did not have the ability to fulfill their calling to reach the next generation, to be a part of the the ministry to them, to enjoy the gifts that the younger people will bring to the church as well, and the perspectives and just the joys that they bring. But on the other end, it also is really bad for students, because to do a separate ministry with just students, that's just focused on students, what does that teach you? That teaches you that church is about you. These kids, there's an epidemic, at least through American research and American churches, of churches that have done this, kids not thinking that church is important when they go to college or when they become an adult, because their whole life church was catered to them. And now that they are of an adult, it's not about them anymore, and they don't know what to do about it. And it just communicates this unbiblical idea that church is about you. And actually being a part of the body, whenever the body of Christ is talked about in the Bible, it's about you coming in to figure out where it is you fit in to serve. And so that is the ideal. We would like for the church to be integrated. We would like for our young people to be fully functioning members of the body that would be used for their gifts, and that they would gain a vision for a bigger picture than just themselves and just their culture in the church. Which there's a lot more to be said about that, I'm sure. But that's the general idea. Now, the reality is that it's difficult, right? As I mentioned, there's the different cultures and blending them. High school youth group, though, is so far in my time here, which at a transitional church, you have to change all the time, especially in pandemics. But for the last 3 years, our goal for Friday night youth group at high school is to get kids in the door. Get kids who are not connected to our church even in the door. And for it to be a place where they experience that ethos I mentioned before, where they hear the gospel clearly presented. But the next goal is to get them from there to start attending our bigger worship services. We've also been able to get some of our students involved as volunteers with Promise Kids. Volunteers. The Gordon family was handing out bulletins every Sunday morning, their kids and all. So we really want our kids to be a part of the bigger church and to see the service as something that is for them too. It's why we stopped Children's Church is a great thing. It serves the purpose for our younger students of teaching them what it is like to worship God, and to teaching them the way we do Children's Church is not just babysitting or child care during the service to keep them from making too much noise. In fact, I would not be bothered by the noise in our service. The purpose of having Children's Church is to teach these kids from a young age, what is the corporate worship all about? How do you gain an understanding of what singing worship songs and listening to sermons are about, the different elements? And we do it educationally. But it's also why we don't do Children's Church forever. We want our kids, middle school and above, to begin to recognize that this church is for me. And that means when Andrew preaches and when I preach, one of the thoughts that goes through our head as we're prepping a sermon is this something that the 11-year-old in the congregation would also understand and that would mean something to them? And obviously it's a growing process, and we don't expect, a lot of it is establishing patterns and rhythms that help kids as they grow older to know they exist. And then as they become more self-aware, they start to realize how important they are to their hearts and to their lives. So that's kind of what we're trying to do. There's some elements of what we're doing. There's some elements. That's one of the elements that I would just love to see better.
Yeah, I would too. And I think I agree with everything you said. I want our people to hear that having a church that is multi-generational is beautiful, and it is also messy. And so, you're going to have, when there's 70 years of age difference, different ways of dressing and different ways of sitting in the pew or different ways of engaging relationally. You're going to have some pretty messy things, and our goal is not to have a clean, crisp church where everything runs smoothly and neatly, but is to have a real church where all the members of the body are incorporated and we all realize this is about something bigger than me and someone bigger than me, namely Jesus. And so if you see somebody passing out bulletins and you think, well, what's a 12-year-old doing passing out my bulletin and welcoming them to church? Well, that's the kind of church that you're walking into. It's one where that person, all 11 years old of them, matter very, very much to us because they matter very, very much to God. They're a full person, and we're teaching them how to be a living, breathing member of God's family, which means serving, even at a young kind of disorganized way. Like, I love it when my kids are out there serving, passing out bulletins, or or helping me run the service or whatever they're doing now. Like, they're going to be totally, as a pastor's kid, I'm sure you can relate. Like, you probably helped your dad run your YouTube services all the time, right?
All the time.
Yeah.
During the pandemic of 1995.
But part of that, like, it would be easy-ish to just put my kids in the back and say, hey, be quiet and don't interrupt the adult thing, right? Because I'm doing ministry here. But I don't want my kids to think that they don't matter and that they're not a part of real ministry. And I don't want anybody in our church to think that either. The call to reach the next generation is a universal call for God's people. All of us are involved in it. We're involved in it in different ways. But we absolutely must be about reaching the next generation together. So, Baxley, we are basically out of time here. So, do you have any parting words for us as we finish up here?
I guess I just want to once again invite parents of young people to see me not as the person primarily responsible for raising your children or teaching them the Bible, but see me as a resource.
Yes.
I want to be a resource to you. I want to help you experience what our students are experiencing, hopefully, in our student ministry, where you can be a messy parent, just like I am to my kids. Mm-hmm. And we can talk about how do we represent the gospel to our kids. That is one role I really want to expand and to grow and to do more of, is I want to spend more time with you parents, and I want to be a resource to you, to love you through parenting, highs and lows, and help you in any way that I can.
Yep, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
All right, Baxley, as always, we are super thankful for you and for the folks on your team.
Absolutely.
Privileged to be able to serve.
Got a good team.
Yeah, it's a privilege to be able to serve with you as a friend, but also you're a pro, and I love seeing your heart for the next gen. So thanks for all you do. And
my pleasure.
Yeah, I'm going to kick you off the screen and close out our program, okay?
All right.
All right, everybody. That is all the time we have today for UCB on Mission. Thank you again for joining us today. Don't forget, if you haven't already, like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so that you don't miss another episode of UCB on Mission, like next week's episode at 3 p.m. with the Reverend, yes, 2 Reverends in a row, the Reverend Peter Dishman, who works for CUR, C-U-R, which is a campus ministry on the campus of our city and country, the University Nacional. So you're not going to want to miss that. It will be fascinating, Peter's work over there at the Nacional. And Peter is a brilliant guy who has preached a number of times at our church and knows very many of you. So 3 p.m. next week. And until then, remember that if you are a Christian, you are on mission. What will that mission look like for you this week? Let's talk about it soon. Ciao.